it's Colleen and welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 in my 3-part series on making a robe a la Francaise. The first video talked about making the petticoat and doing all of the decorations along the front of that petticoat. The second part talked about making a gown and how you would fit that gown and construct it with all the pleats in the back. This part focuses on the trimming. One thing I've learned from making these two gowns is that the trimming is as unique as the wearer. It could be super fancy, lots of frills, lots of ruffles, lots of bows if that's what the wearer liked, or it can be very streamlined and simple, again, if that's what the wearer wanted. The other thing that might impact how much trim you put on a gown is how much fabric you have to work with. In the first gown that I made, I had basically unlimited fabric. I mean, it wasn't unlimited, but it might as well have been. I had more than enough to make any kind of trimming I wanted to make for that gown, and so I was able to be very lavish with the trimmings. This time around, I'm working with a lot less fabric. And if you go back to that previous video, which I know it's been a while, you'll see that I'm eking out this robe a la Francaise from about just under 4.5 yards of green silk, and I only had enough for one panel of the cream colored petticoat silk. So I don't have very much left to trim the gown once I've done all of the construction of the main gown itself. That's okay. I'm a pretty simple person in my everyday life. I don't tend to wear lots of ruffles and frills, so having a more simplified robe a la Francaise for this second gown that I'm making is absolutely perfectly fine for me. Together, let's go back in time once again to October 2023 when I was making that first gown for the ball that we had here in St. Louis. And then today I will show you how I'm trimming the second gown. So it's probably 2 days since I filmed last. I've done a lot of handwork just in front of the TV. I've also not had as much time to work. And I'm at the point now where the work I've done most recently on the gown has not made any big visual impact. I did add these shoulder straps of the fashion fabric across the top here. That took way longer than I expected it to, and it was a lot harder to get a neat finish than I expected. So this is the 18th century way. You fit the sleeve and then you add this over the top. I think because I didn't set my sleeves the 18th century way, I probably didn't need to do this way. I personally might have liked it to leave the shoulder strap attached and have it go up and over. The other thing I did was I made these straps come back further and at an angle so that it would match the extant garments. The shoulder strap of the lining goes straight across right about here, but when you look at the extents, it's more on this angle here. So I did attach them down that way, and then that leaves me with this last piece right here, which will go over to bind the raw edges at the top of the sack. I've also been working on patterning the stomacher, and so the last time I had this gown on, or it might have been a time or two ago, I was able to measure how much this distance was, how much this distance was, and how long I needed it to be from wherever I wanted that stomacher to come to wherever I wanted it to come to down here. And it's about 13 inches long. This is the sort of raw edges, right? It's about 13 inches long coming down to here in the middle, and then it's about 11 or 12 inches wide at the top. And then it narrows down to be about, 5 or 6 inches here at the part that will show under the gown. All of this will then give me plenty of space to pin the edges of my gown over here, because what you don't want is to make a stomacher that is so small that you don't cover the edges with the robings of your gown. I think this is going to work. I'm going to go ahead and make it up in 2 layers of linen with boning channels sewn in. We'll have the layer of silk with all the decorations on top of it. Then I'll stitch up these 3 sides, and that will allow me to insert the boning. And then once the boning's in, I can bind the edges or trim them or whatever I need to do on the edges to get a clean look. So I'll figure that piece of it out when I get there. But for now, this gives me my construction. I'm trying to not cut into what's remaining of my yardage. I'm trying to use scraps because I think I have enough of this green silk to make like another gown to go with the petticoat I already made. I saw another costumer take a piece of fabric and then just run a gathering stitch right down the center and ruffle that up and then press it flat so that there was like background texture. So I'm going to try that. This piece of fabric was not an ideal size or shape for this, but it worked really well. And I think once I stitch in and turn This, you know, I've got 1/2 inch seam allowances. I think it'll work. Here's where I landed, and I actually think it looks really good. So I put this tatting down the middle and sewed on a purl in each of the centers of those motifs, and then I did bind it. That's going to look really good. It might be enough. Okay, it's Saturday. There is 1 week before the ball. My earlier enthusiasm about the speed with which I was completing this project has definitely diminished. I'm a little nervous, I have to say, because I have not only the dress to finish, but I have to take care of all the other stuff that I need to do. So fixing up my hair, like figuring out like my hair extensions and all that stuff is a big part of that. And then I need to do a little work on my shoes. Today I have about 5 hours that I can work on this project. I'm going to see if I can get the ruffles installed. So they're cut out. I just have to make them and put them on the sleeves. And I'm going to try and put the binding on the back at the top of the sack. And then the only other thing that will be left is putting the ruffle trim on the dress itself. Oh, and I'll have some time tomorrow morning too. So ideally by the end of the day tomorrow, those jobs will be, if not completed, mostly completed. That's my goal. Anyway, I just have a lot to do, and it's getting down to a lot of fiddly hand sewing, not super interesting to film. And so I just, and also my brain is such that if I'm concentrating, I can't film. And if I'm filming, I can't concentrate. But I will show you the ruffles that I cut out. These were patterned from Patterns of Fashion. And the interesting thing about Patterns of Fashion is they're copying directly from an extant garment. So you're seeing exactly what somebody made in 1770. And it's interesting to me how often things were not symmetrical. So you can tell based on the pattern that they took off of the garment that somebody just kind of freehanded these things. So I copied exactly what was in Patterns of Fashion, which copied exactly whatever that maker did, which wasn't symmetrical. So I think that's interesting. But anyway, it's cool to see in real life and 3D these ruffles that were made all those years ago and now copied, and I'm doing the same thing. It's really cool. This took a lot longer than I expected. So the total for ruffling and planning and stitching and making the enjagant, which I don't know, that's the French word for it. It's this lacy bit here, and I think it's French for go big or go home. But anyway, all of this took me about 5.5 hours. It just was a lot more time than I thought, but they look lovely. If I have a chance and I can come back, I've already made this ruffle, and I think this could look really nice. So if you put it just barely over that tatted trim, I think that's a nice bit of texture on the top of the sleeve and gives it just a bit more of a statement. But I will not do it until I have everything else finished because I'm just getting worried about running out of time. All right, it's time to trim the gown. And as usual, I am overthinking this. I have plenty of fashion fabric and plenty of silk to trim it to within 1 inch of its life if I want to. I don't particularly like the extra floofy, fluffy trim. I prefer a more tailored or flat type of trim. I like the way it looks a lot better. This is gown number 18 in Patterns of Fashion 6, and the trim along the front of this gown lays pretty flat. So I like the way that looks, and I think I'm going to mimic that with my fashion fabric. I wanted to bring in some lace as an edging. So this is the same lace I used on my engageants and around the neckline of my stomacher. However, I only have about 5 yards from the floor to the waist. I measured from the waist up around the neck and then back down to the floor. That's 131 inches of distance if I didn't pleat anything up at all. If I were to multiply that by 2 so that I would have a sort of a densely gathered ruffle, 2 times the length gathered down to the length you need, I would need 262 inches or 7.3 yards of material. I can do 7.3 yards of the fashion fabric. I have 5 yards of the lace. The nice thing about Patterns of Fashion, if you look here, you can figure out how the trim was cut. You can see here the shape of the trim pieces, how long they would be ungathered, and then you can compare it to the length on the garment and see exactly what that is. So Patterns of Fashion did do 2 to 1, and I think 2 to 1 for the fashion fabric, and then 1.5 or something to 1 for the lace is probably the way to go. This is like a glimpse inside my brain. It's all the what ifs. It's the, I wish I had someone to say precisely this is what you have to have. But also I'm working from my stash, and this lace is beautiful, and it's the only one that matches the color of the fashion fabric. It's the only one. And so I can't switch to a different kind of lace, even though I have gobs of it. I don't have anything else in the right color. It's either too white or it's too brown, and it's just not the right shade. I'm going to make it work. I just have to figure out how to make it work. All right, I did a lot of measuring on the Patterns of Fashion pattern for these ruffles, and I measured at what point they were at their widest all the way to the narrowest point. They start at 5 inches and graduate to 4, 3, 2, 1.5, and 1, and eventually they become 1 inch, and that's what goes kind of up around the bodice and the neck and back down again, and then you get wider toward the bottom. This little note paper made perfect sense to me at the time, but here I am a year later editing the video, and none of what I'm saying in this clip makes any sense whatsoever. You basically have to continue to do the math if you're thinking 2 to 1, and you know that your distance where you are 4 inches is from 52 to 68 inches of your finished strip, then you have to account for that difference times 2 and cut those pieces and ruffle them up. Now this next section will make more sense. I have my 5-inch width, and I'm joining it to a 4-inch width here, and that joins to a 3-inch width here. Then I should be able to gradually take this and cut off the extra down to the width I want, and then this will gradually cut, and then that will gradually cut, so that you end up with that sort of wedge shaped piece. But it's a little easier than trying to wrangle the entire strip and get an even angle. Now I'm going to measure 35 inches up from the bottom of the widest piece, because I looked at the Patterns of Fashion template, and it's 5 inches wide all the way to 35 inches. And so I'm going to measure that. This is 24. I need another 11 inches. Okay, so from this point on, we're going to start to taper from 5 inches wide to 4 inches wide. I'm just going to make a line that goes from this point to the next point where the seam is. And that is where I'm going to cut it to begin my slope. Now you notice that the straight edge right here is what's going to stay on the edge of the skirt. So this right here goes on the edge of the skirt. This is on the side that's facing toward the side of my body. I have to have a left and a right, and I did account for that in my stitching. So I would cut that along here. Now, when I go to the next bit, it's the same thing. I'm just going to take that and have a very gentle slope or a taper between the widest part of this piece to the narrowest. I have a pair of scallop shears here, and they cut really well through linen and silk and stuff like that. They do not cut through this fabric. It just won't. I've got a big pinking shear. I recently had these sharpened and they cut really well. But I don't like this pointy zigzag, I guess. What I found is if I cut it with the pinking shears and then do a little melting, because this is synthetic, right? So I can just melt it a little bit with the flame. It seals the edges, but also I end up with a nice scallop. That was a happy accident, but I'm really glad that that is how it's going to turn out. I finished gathering this strip, and it just becomes too small to manage once you get up here. And it's really hard to press it. It's really hard to manage it. It's just driving me crazy. So my thinking is I will attach this, which I like the way it looks. I think it looks good, and I like the proportionally it gets smaller here. And then I think at the waist, I'm going to cut it off, and I've decided that about 2.5 inch wide, gathered down the same way as on the skirt, which looks like this, will be pretty good over these shoulders here. I don't know, I kind of don't mind this being very, very, like barely gathered up in here. I think it looks nice. You know, you can tell by the width of this trim, you're not going to see much of it anyway. So just a little bit of gathering will keep it from overwhelming the top of the dress. I finished this gown at 10 o'clock last night, and I think it's just right. I had thought about perhaps putting in some additional ruffles, like around here on the side, but this morning I'm looking at it going, nope, it's perfect. It's done. I don't want to add anything else. My trick when working on a project is to keep a basket like this, and I keep all the bits and pieces that I need for the project in the basket. When I set this project aside, and it has been 8 months now, when I set it aside 8 months ago, all of the trimming pieces, all of my notes, all of my pattern pieces were in this basket. So the first thing I did when I picked it back up again was start going through the basket and reorienting myself with the project. This is literally all I have left of the fabric. I've made the stomacher and I've made the gown and petticoat, but I don't have anything but this left to decorate it. So I'm gonna have to do a lot of math to figure out how much can I set aside for the sleeve ruffles, how much do I have to decorate the gown, and then within how much I have to decorate the gown, what kind of trim can I make? Can it be full and ruffled, or does it need to be sleek and pleated? I don't know yet. That's the answer. Well, I just don't know. And you'll find out when I find out. This is where I've landed with the stomacher, and I can always do more to it. But right now I think I'm happy with doing less to it. It's a false button front. They did have gowns back then that would have two pieces of fabric here that actually did, you know, go over and fasten with buttons or with pins. That's called a compare front. This is a false compare front. So it's all stitched down. These buttons are just sewn on for decoration. It is two pieces of linen cut to the shape and width that I needed. I've sewn in the boning channels. I've covered it with silk. I've trimmed it with a bias strip of this green silk, and actually, you know, quick little tip, it wasn't bias tape at all. It wasn't bias strip. It was just straight grain, and it was from one little strip of stuff I had left over from making the gown in the first place. Barely enough to go around the edge, but it works. So I've got this and I think it looks fine. I did add this little bit of a ruffle. Here I have a tucker that I've been experimenting with, and I may add that. That was very common to see on these gowns, and I think I can leave it just like this and it looks okay. Originally I was going to add these ruffles, so I have two of these. It's all I have left of the silk that I can dedicate to this, and I thought about, you know, adding this along the way, kind of in an undulating strip. I'm not 100% sure that that's needed. I will set these aside. If I don't use them someplace else, I may come back if I think it needs something and put that on here. But I kind of like the clean look without it. This is the trim for the petticoat. You can absolutely stand there at the ironing board and fold and press and measure all of your pleats. That's easy enough to do. But when I started thinking about that this was not the only piece of pleated trim I had to do, but instead I also had several yards of trim to go around the opening of the gown, I decided to make a pleating board. This is canvas that I have folded and pleated to the size of the trim that I want, and then ironed it flat and stitched it down. And then on the back, I ironed on some iron-on interfacing. And that holds everything in place so that these aren't going to go anywhere. They're stuck in this position, which is great. That's just what I want. So for example, if I wanted to make pleated trim out of this, I've got this little card here. I can kind of shove that down in there and then come around on the other side and shove it in. But anyway, you would move your way along here and you would press it, let it cool, and then you can remove it from the board and press it again if you need to. So this trim for the petticoat is 10 inches long, and I went ahead and made this, which is 12 inches long, so that I had, you know, plenty of space to put my fabric in there. And I'm telling you, that worked great. I made a second one in a smaller scale for the trim that's going to go around the opening of the gown. But this worked great, and I didn't have to buy anything because I had the materials for it already in my stash, and it literally took me about, I don't know, if it took me 10 minutes, I'd be surprised. For the sleeves, I have enough of the green silk to do a ruffle at the elbow. And I think I'm going to pleat the top and let it hang free from the bottom. I'm just going to have to work on what that actually looks like and how to construct it. But I did not have enough of the silk to cut a second ruffle, which is typically what you would see. Not always, but you would often see 2 or even 3 layers of ruffles. I have this much left of the cream colored silk. I have one for each sleeve. It's a strip, the width of the fabric. I think I'm going to just gather that and put it on to a piece of fabric, and then that will get gathered and that will go underneath this piece. So you'll see from the outside, you'll see maybe this much of the cream colored silk. And then from the inside, you'll see this. To create these pleated sleeve ruffles, I used a pleating board and just tucked in the top part of the ruffle and ironed it down. And I tried not to crease it beyond the first couple of inches. I think it creates a really nice effect. You need to stitch down each of the pleats, and I chose to do 2 small stitches per pleat just to secure them prior to attaching this to the dress itself. I used a piece of thread that came from the fabric so that it matched perfectly. Then when it was time to sew it onto the sleeve, I stitched it by hand again and went right through where those previous stitches were. I suppose you could do this all in one, but I liked the control of having the stitches secured before I tried to add them onto the sleeve. Now you see me drawing up a gathering stitch on the cream colored sleeve ruffle and then pinning it into place so that I can attach it to the sleeve itself. This is just sewn to the lining, so you don't even see those stitches on the outside. As I pinned, I made sure that the amount that would show below the green ruffle was even all the way around the sleeve. These turned out pretty good. I wish I had had more of this to make it a fuller ruffle, but these ruffles is all I had that I could spare for, for this part of the dress. I have a full width of fabric. It's 60 inches wide, and at its narrowest point it's 28 inches. There is a flaw here in the weaving, and so whoever manufactured it marked it, which is really good, so I can stay away from this flaw right here. But what I need to decide is how I'm going to cut this up in order to put the trim on the gown. Using the pleating board, I had a little scrap of fabric. I measured this and then I pleated it, and I measured how wide that was, or how long it was once it was finished. This was 15 inches and it went down to about 6.5 inches. So it's just a little less than half once it's finished pleating. So I have to take that sort of shrinkage into account when I'm working on my trim for the gown. You know, I have to think about, do I want to have any matching trim for a hat? Do I want to do anything else with the gown once I'm done? I do want to be economical, but I'm confident at this point that I have enough fabric to do a nice, you know, not too skimpy trim. I mean, I think 4 inches proportionally, that's right here, that's about as wide as I would want it. The math appears to have worked well, and I still have a pretty good size of fabric left over. I have all this left. Of course, there's the flaw, so I've got to avoid that. So I'm going to get all of this done and put onto the gown, and then if I decide to do something else with this, at least I know I have it. But this is more than I thought I was going to have for sure. I ended up using an old gift card and some tweezers to pleat up the fabric using the pleating board. Then I ironed it with a little bit of steam, and I let the fabric cool underneath these clappers. The fabric needs to cool completely before you try to remove it from the pleating board. Then you can move on to the next section. This has become like an accordion, right? It's really stretchy. In order to make sure that you maintain your pleats at the size that you need them to be, you can't have it stretch out. Before you can start working with it, it has to be stable somehow. I suppose the only other thing I could potentially do, now that I'm thinking about it, I could do like what I did on this, and that is there's a piece of fusible interfacing along the back, and I pressed it down so that these pleats don't lift up. And I could potentially do that on the back here. I did a test where I've got my little piece of interfacing on the back and I laid this on top and pressed it, and that actually works really well. It stabilizes it enough to be able to then go back through and stitch it down. The interfacing worked really well, and it's enabled me to pin it to my gown and kind of see whether the proportions are working the way I expected them to. I did end up narrowing from the waist up just a little bit, and I think it looks great, and it'll be a lot easier for me to stitch this to the gown now that all the pleats are kind of held in place. Now to repeat that entire process for the other side. I've decided, with my husband's help, to just do 2 inches all the way down the front and get that stitched on and live with it for a while. And if I need to or want to put something else, I can. So I trimmed this all down. I use the same process that I used on the sleeve ruffles, and that is to put 2 small stitches per pleat to attach it to the gown. I ended up sewing down both long edges of this pleated trim in order to keep it stable. I know that sounds like it would take forever to do that on a gown opening that's about 3.5 yards long, but it really does go quickly, and the effect is nice with those little tiny hand stitches. I also decided, since I had fabric left over, that I would make some bows for the sleeves. These are the 5-loop bows, except I'm only going to do 4 loops, in the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking. And they're super simple. I have cut 4 pieces, so there's 2 for each sleeve. I do have these buttons that I made, because I just, keep saying this, but I don't have anything left of this beige silk. And out of some scraps, I made these buttons. So I think I'm going to do 2 loops, and you stack them over each other, and then I can put that there and stick them to the sleeve. I am done with this dress for now. I'm going to press it and try it on. There you go. That is the end of my series on making a robe a la Francaise. I really hope it was helpful to you and informative. I hope that you learned something as you went along, and if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed seeing how I made my gowns. Thanks for your patience as I took a break from the YouTube channel once again. It seems like we are having crisis after crisis in our family. Everything's okay now, but I did take a lengthy break from this channel. That doesn't mean I was not sewing. I did have some time to work on some pattern testing for Kenna Sews. I'll put her Instagram handle up here. She is the brains behind Sew Last Century Patterns. This is part of her PhD work on larger sizes in history. She has examined several antique garments and taken patterns from them and put them out available for people to buy and use to make their own historical costumes. So I've been doing some pattern testing for her, and I'm posting all of that work on Instagram. If you're not following me over there, you're missing out on the stuff that happens in between videos. So I've done probably 5 different things for her just in recent times, and I think overall I've done 8 pattern tests for her. I've enjoyed the process. I really like being able to do the puzzling out of those patterns, and it's good for the soul sometimes to just sew without the complexity of filming for YouTube. If you're not following me on Instagram, you're missing out, so make sure you head on over there and follow me so that you can keep up to date with what's happening in between videos on this channel. And then don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you don't miss any of my future videos when they come out. I really do hope to go back to publishing videos more frequently. I know I've said that before, and here we are with another lengthy hiatus, but I really do want to get back on track. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.